Do you know why your attention feels restless even when you feel calm? What if your own thoughts are shaped before you even notice? You think you are choosing freely, but your device already decided first. Phone addiction is not just about liking distraction, it is engineered dependence. Your device is built as a psychological lab that never closes, always collecting. Every scroll, every pause, every tiny hesitation becomes data about your nervous system. That data is turned into predictions about what keeps you staring the longest. Then those predictions are used against your focus, again and again, without warning. You call it passing time, but the system calls it behavioral training. Your brain loves patterns that reward it with quick hits of relief. When you feel slightly bored, your mind searches for an easy soothing signal. Your device answers instantly, offering colorful movement and endless small pieces of novelty. Each tiny reward feels harmless alone, yet they stack into a powerful loop. Your brain begins linking relief with reaching for the screen automatically. The motion becomes so fast and fluent that it feels like a reflex. You think you made a choice, but the loop fired before thought appeared. Inside your brain, a reward pathway lights up when something feels exciting or relieving. This pathway releases chemicals that tell your mind, remember this, do it again soon. Phone designers understand this circuit very clearly, even if you never studied it. They shape notifications, sounds, and visuals to match this reward circuit precisely. A sudden light or vibration hits your senses before you fully recognize it. Your attention jumps toward it, hoping for connection, approval, or stimulating information. Even when the content is empty, the reward pathway still expects something meaningful. Your disappointment does not break the loop, it usually strengthens the next attempt. Your mind keeps thinking, maybe the next notification will finally give what is missing. Over time, your tolerance for silence and stillness starts shrinking quietly. Moments without stimulation begin to feel heavy, awkward, or strangely uncomfortable. Your brain now reads calm spaces as signals that something important is missing. Instead of staying present with that discomfort, you escape into the familiar glow. This escape keeps you from meeting your own thoughts with clear awareness. You avoid inner questions by drowning them under constant movement and digital noise. The more you avoid those questions, the more restless your inner world becomes. Restlessness then drives stronger escape, and the cycle feeds on your weakness directly. This creates a subtle split inside you that you rarely acknowledge clearly. One side of you wants deep focus, peace, and self-respect. The other side wants quick relief, shallow escape, and instant emotional soothing. Your device happily serves the second side while pretending to support the first. You open it for learning, but minutes later you are lost in endless feed. You promise yourself only a short break, then half an hour vanishes silently. Each time this happens, your self-trust becomes a little bit weaker inside. You start believing you cannot control yourself, so you surrender even faster. Phone addiction fits perfectly into dark psychology and self-mastery failure. A hidden system benefits when you stay distracted, reactive, and emotionally unstable. People who cannot hold attention are easier to nudge, sell to, and influence. When your mind craves constant stimulation, you avoid long thinking and uncomfortable truths. Without long thinking, you rarely question motives behind the platforms you depend on. You accept terms, updates, and algorithms without reading because your craving wants speed. This makes you predictable, and predictable people are easy resources for silent controllers. Your patterns become so visible that you can be steered without open force. Notice how the design never encourages real disconnection or deep internal reflection. You rarely see a message telling you to log off and be still. Instead, you see invitations to return, rewards for streaks, or reminders of what you missed. Every feature keeps your identity tied to digital presence and virtual reactions. You start feeling that you only exist fully when you are online. Offline time begins to feel like absence, like you are fading from relevance. This emotional hook makes you guard your device like something essential for survival. You are not just using it, you are slowly becoming part of it. The most dangerous part is quiet because it feels like nothing unusual. The addiction hides inside normal habits that everyone around you also shares daily. No one calls it manipulation, they call it connection, convenience, or entertainment. So you lower your guard further, trusting what society has already normalized for you. Meanwhile, the system keeps refining your profile, knowing which buttons work most reliably. It learns when you are tired, lonely, angry, or hungry for validation. It times certain notifications for those vulnerable windows, capturing you at weakest moments. You think timing is random, but your history reveals exactly when you are fragile. Your brain slowly forgets how to enjoy depth, patience, and slow satisfaction. You chase constant micro-rewards instead of building long-term inner stability. Attention fragments into tiny pieces, scattered across endless flashes of unimportant content. In this fragmented state, serious goals feel heavy, distant, and almost impossible. So you postpone them while you chase another quick surge of stimulation. This postponing destroys your respect for your own word to yourself. Once your self-respect is damaged, you obey external impulses more than inner decisions. And a person who obeys impulses is easy to lead quietly from outside. When you try to cut back, the withdrawal does not look dramatic or obvious. It appears as mild irritation, restless boredom, and an urge that feels strangely reasonable. Your mind starts negotiating, promising only a quick check, nothing serious, nothing that steals time. Yet that quick check usually becomes a long drift through empty but stimulating fragments. Each broken promise trains your brain to expect surrender, not discipline, in future situations. Discipline then feels unnatural, almost painful, while surrender feels smooth, familiar, and easy. This is how control reverses quietly, effort feels wrong, and weakness feels comfortable. The more you repeat this reversal, the more your will folds without resistance. You may think you are too aware to fall completely into this trap. Awareness alone is not enough, because the system works faster than conscious thought. By the time you notice what happened, your attention has already been captured again. Real protection requires redesigning your relationship with stimulation, not just blaming your lack of will. You must understand which sensations pull you the hardest and why you always obey them. Only then can you start breaking the invisible contracts your brain signed with constant noise. Otherwise, every attempt at change will feel like self-punishment instead of liberation. And when change feels like punishment, you will escape back into the glowing cage. There is another quiet cost that hides inside your daily scrolling patterns. Your sensitivity to real-life pleasures starts dropping without giving any clear warning. Simple experiences feel flat compared to the intense colors and rapid changes on screens. This contrast tricks you into thinking life is dull when attention is simply damaged. A damaged attention system cannot feel depth, so it craves louder signals to feel anything. The louder the signal, the easier it is for external forces to steer you. In that state, subtle wisdom and calm intuition become almost impossible to hear clearly. You move through your days guided by noise, while your deeper self remains muted. There is a final layer most people never recognize because it feels invisible. When your attention is trained externally, your inner voice loses authority over time. You begin trusting feelings triggered by the screen more than thoughts born in silence. That shift decides who truly owns your mind, you or the unseen designers. Every notification you answer without thinking strengthens their pattern and weakens your autonomy. Every urge you obey without pause tells your brain that you follow the device. Slowly, your identity is shaped around reactions, not deliberate choices and firm values. The unsettling question is simple: if your reactions are trained, who is really living? Do you feel a strange panic when nothing is stimulating you? Why does silence feel dangerous to a mind shaped by non-stop novelty? What if your nervous system cannot remember life without constant micro-rewards? Your brain is not addicted to information, it is addicted to emotional interruption. Each interruption resets your internal state, blocking long thinking and inner clarity. A trained brain begins to fear uninterrupted thought, because uninterrupted thought brings truth. Truth demands responsibility, responsibility demands effort, effort threatens the lazy reward circuit. So the brain learns to chase shortcuts instead of substance, convenience instead of direction. This addiction begins inside a primitive reward system that evolved for survival. The system once responded to danger, opportunity, hunger, heat, cold, and threat. Now it responds to digital stimulation that mimics survival signals without real danger. Every notification feels like something urgent even when nothing is happening. Your mind reacts before evaluating because urgency bypasses rational control quickly. That bypass is the weakness exploited by every attention-based platform you depend on. Phone addiction is not random behavior, it follows a precise conditioning model. Conditioning links an external cue to an internal expectation of relief. The cue can be light, vibration, color, sound, or even memory of missing something. The brain pairs that cue with soothing reward, and the pattern repeats automatically. You believe you want the content, but you only want the conditioned reward feeling. The content itself is usually irrelevant, the reward pathway is the real master. Conditioning becomes stronger when rewards arrive unpredictably. Unpredictable reward creates anticipation, anticipation creates obsession. Obsession destroys restraint because the next reward might feel significant. Random stimulus pushes you into endless scrolling, hoping for something special. The uncertainty keeps you trapped because certainty would reduce emotional tension. This uncertainty is engineered because uncertain expectation produces maximum engagement. Your mind adapts to whatever environment trains it repeatedly. Constant stimulation becomes a new baseline, and lower stimulation feels like deprivation. Deprivation creates irritation, and irritation sends you running toward the next dopamine burst. Over time, you stop noticing the irritation, you only notice the urge. The urge becomes part of your identity, like a personality trait instead of a conditioned reflex. People start believing they are naturally impatient when they are simply chemically trained. Your emotional regulation depends on your ability to hold internal discomfort. If you escape every discomfort with stimulation, emotional endurance collapses. A person who cannot endure discomfort becomes psychologically fragile. Fragile minds avoid confrontation with their own fears, doubts, weaknesses, and empty spaces. Without that confrontation, growth dies silently and identity becomes shallow performance. Shallow identity seeks approval to cover the emptiness created by avoidance. Phone addiction amplifies approval seeking without your permission. Every like, view, reaction, and response becomes a tiny validation drug. That validation teaches you that worth is external, never internal. External worth depends on fluctuating feedback, so you chase more stimulation. The chase turns into emotional dependence because silence equals perceived insignificance. Addiction is not about entertainment, it is about escaping insignificance. When insignificance scares you, you use stimulation to feel visible. Your brain is tricked into believing that attention equals existence. The more you believe this lie, the more desperate your digital presence becomes. You start checking metrics, updates, reactions, and signals of approval. Instead of building stability, you build dependence on micro-recognition loops. This dependence turns you into a perfect consumer of symbols instead of meaning. There is another psychological layer that hides beneath stimulation dependence. The mind loses tolerance for boredom, even though boredom is a doorway to creativity. Without boredom, your brain cannot wander freely or generate fresh ideas. Creativity demands open space, but addiction fills every space with noise. Noise robs imagination, and imagination is what helps you think beyond manipulation. Without imagination, you follow templates set by others, not principles chosen by yourself. This makes you easier to influence socially because you fear missing signals. Your brain becomes hyper-aware of what others might think or expect. You start mirroring trends instead of questioning direction. This mirroring makes you predictable, and predictable behavior benefits external control systems. Predictable behavior can be nudged gradually, without confrontation or awareness. A mind that avoids reflection cannot detect the slow drift of identity. Your sleep patterns begin to change because stimulation hijacks circadian signals. Screens flood your senses with artificial light, delaying natural fatigue signals. Delayed fatigue keeps you scrolling because your brain misreads tiredness as craving. This confusion increases irritability, lowers impulse control, and weakens decision strength. Weakened decisions lead to more surrender, more scrolling, more training. Training becomes identity shaping, and identity shaping decides future destiny. In this trained state, long-term goals feel abstract and overwhelming. Your attention cannot hold a path that offers no immediate reward. Your motivation collapses under the weight of slow progress. Without motivation, you surrender to distraction because distraction feels safe. That safety is toxic because it hides the danger of wasted time. Time wasted becomes self-doubt, and self-doubt becomes emotional paralysis. Emotional paralysis often hides behind constant activity disguised as productivity. You scroll news, tips, advice, quotes, and information to feel productive. This information overload produces illusion of movement without real direction. Your brain mistakes consumption for growth, but consumption without action builds paralysis. You drown in input until action feels too heavy to attempt. Then you seek more stimulation to avoid the guilt of inaction. Every cycle strengthens the architecture of psychological capture. Capture does not require force, it requires confusion between desire and addiction. When desire and addiction feel similar, control becomes invisible. You do not resist what feels pleasurable, even if it destroys discipline. Discipline decays quietly until you become loyal to impulses instead of intentions. Impulse loyalty is the opposite of self-mastery and inner authority. A controlled mind rarely asks the forbidden question. Why does my craving feel so urgent when nothing important is happening? A mind afraid of that question stays obedient to stimulation. Obedience becomes habit, habit becomes personality, personality becomes destiny. A destiny shaped by addiction does not belong to you. It belongs to the architects who designed your reactions. The next layer reveals something darker and more uncomfortable. If your attention is programmable, what else can be shaped without resistance? Do you notice how quickly irritation appears when nothing reacts to you? Why does your mind demand constant feedback like a survival requirement? What if your emotional stability now depends on artificial signals? A phone-controlled mind does not chase pleasure, it chases interruption. Interruption keeps your nervous system alert and hungry for new stimulation. Alert minds feel alive, even when nothing meaningful is happening. That artificial sense of aliveness blinds you to emotional fatigue. Fatigue increases dependence because exhaustion seeks shortcuts. Shortcuts replace discipline, and discipline is the foundation of self-control. Attention is not a mental habit, it is a biological resource. This resource is limited, fragile, and easily redirected with micro-triggers. Every small trigger steals a unit of attention and converts it into reaction. Reactions feel effortless, so the brain prefers them over thoughtful choices. When reaction becomes your default response, awareness loses authority. Awareness cannot guide a mind that reacts faster than it reflects. Phone addiction operates like a reward pyramid with invisible tiers. The lowest tier gives stimulation with no meaning, just raw sensation. The next tier offers novelty, something slightly different from the last input. Another tier offers emotional provocation, something that activates identity. Each higher tier demands more attention while giving less fulfillment. This scarcity forces deeper engagement because scarcity fuels obsession. You think you enjoy the content, but enjoyment is not the driver. The driver is tension, and tension demands release. The moment you release tension, you repeat the cycle to avoid collapse. This cycle trains your brain to fear inner stillness. Stillness feels like weakness, even though stillness is clarity. A mind that fears clarity will cling to stimulation like a safety blanket. Addiction thrives when the brain mistakes discomfort for danger. Danger triggers impulsive escape, because escape once saved your ancestors. Now escape serves convenience, not survival. You flee from your own mind with the same reflex once used to flee predators. That confusion between survival and preference creates a psychological cage. The cage has no walls because craving is enough to hold you. Every craving tells you a silent message. You cannot wait. You cannot endure. You cannot be still. The brain listens and adapts. Then impatience becomes identity, not a trained reflex. Identity built on impatience will chase stimulation as a core value. That identity cannot sustain commitment. Commitment needs duration. Duration needs calm. Calm needs emotional strength. When emotional strength breaks, commitment collapses. Collapsed commitment becomes guilt, and guilt becomes a craving trigger. You escape guilt using the same device that caused the collapse. This is how the machine makes you return voluntarily. Your emotional baselines shift under constant stimulation. Small joy feels invisible compared to digital intensity. Slow satisfaction feels boring compared to rapid novelty. Real interaction feels too risky compared to curated approval. Inner reflection feels pointless compared to constant noise. Self-respect loses weight against fast validation tokens. You stop building yourself and start performing for external response. A performing mind is always watching imaginary observers. You monitor reactions, expectations, comparisons, trends, and signals of acceptance. That monitoring drains cognitive energy faster than physical labor. Fatigue from over-monitoring creates emotional numbness. Numbness demands stimulation to feel anything again. You scroll because you cannot feel. You scroll because you cannot stop. You scroll because numbness scares you. The most dangerous effect hides in your threat detection system. Your brain tracks social threat as seriously as physical threat. When your device pushes information that triggers envy, fear, outrage, or comparison, your nervous system reacts like danger is close. Danger responses increase screen time because alertness looks for more information. More information increases fear, and fear increases dependency. Dependency hides behind your instinct for safety. Your nervous system becomes hyperreactive. Quick to judge. Quick to panic. Quick to crave. A hyperreactive mind cannot hold long ideas or stable values. Values require slowness. Slowness requires safety. Safety requires internal grounding. Addiction weakens grounding, so values drift with stimulation. When values drift, identity becomes fluid and unstable. Unstable identity seeks anchors in external signals. External signals keep changing, so stability never forms. You become emotionally nomadic, always chasing a new center. That emotional migration destroys long-term direction. Without direction, life becomes maintenance instead of evolution. This collapse shows up in motivation. Motivation requires delayed reward. Delayed reward requires patience. Patience requires endurance. Endurance requires emotional stillness. Addiction removes stillness, so motivation evaporates. Goals become ideas you admire but never execute. You start consuming content about achievement instead of achieving anything. You study discipline without practicing discipline. You read about clarity while drowning in stimulation. You watch others succeed because their growth activates your reward system. You mistake their movement for yours. This illusion keeps you inactive for years. Yet the darkest layer is not inactivity. The darkest layer is ownership. If a system controls your attention, and attention controls your decisions, and decisions control your direction, then who owns your future? The next reveal asks a sharper question. If stimulation controls emotion, what controls stimulation? Do you ever wonder why stimulation arrives faster than your thoughts? Why does your device react before you form intention? What if your emotional reality is shaped by engineered timing? Timing is the silent weapon behind addictive engagement. Your brain interprets timing as meaning, even when nothing meaningful is present. A sudden flash feels important because evolution trained you to notice immediacy. What once signaled threat or opportunity now signals nothing but distraction. Yet your nervous system still responds as if survival depends on reacting. Reaction becomes a habit loop that steals attention from conscious intention. When you react faster than you think, you lose authorship of your behavior. Authorship is the core of inner authority, Without authority, there is obedience. Obedience to stimulation feels harmless, but obedience scales over time. Small obedience becomes lifestyle, lifestyle becomes identity, identity becomes destiny. Destiny shaped by stimulation follows one rule: seek intensity and avoid stillness. Intensity feels like life, stillness feels like emptiness. But emptiness is misread, emptiness is unfiltered awareness. Awareness allows discomfort, and discomfort reveals flaws. People trained by stimulation avoid flaws because flaws demand work. Work requires depth, and depth requires singular focus. Singular focus collapses when attention is fragmented. Fragmentation produces emotional instability because the mind never settles. An unsettled mind cannot choose direction, it only follows impulse. Impulse is the easiest entry point for psychological steering. Steering begins with emotional priming. Priming sets your internal state before you notice the shift. A primed mind craves certain emotional flavors repeatedly. Maybe outrage, maybe validation, maybe comparison, maybe novelty. Whatever flavor locks your attention becomes your internal drug. Once priming succeeds, stimulation becomes identity reinforcement. You think you are choosing interests, but interests are being shaped. The system measures which emotions lock you longest. Then it feeds you more of that emotional flavor to strengthen loyalty. Loyalty to stimulation overrides loyalty to personal standards. Standards demand autonomy, autonomy demands refusal. Addiction hates refusal because refusal creates distance. Distance breaks the spell of immediacy. When immediacy breaks, clarity enters. Clarity threatens the entire reward loop. The loop also rewires your emotional expectations. Your brain begins expecting rapid shifts in sensation. Slow emotional build feels wrong. Slow learning feels wrong. Slow pleasure feels wrong. Wrong becomes boring, boring becomes painful, painful becomes unacceptable. You chase intensity because your tolerance for calm is gone. Losing tolerance for calm sabotages emotional maturity. Maturity requires sitting with uncertainty long enough to observe truth. Truth demands that you confront internal wounds. Internal wounds hurt. Stimulation silences pain. So avoidance becomes soothing. Avoidance uses stimulation as anesthesia. But anesthesia has psychological cost. When you numb pain, you numb clarity. When you numb clarity, you numb responsibility. When responsibility fades, you lose direction. Direction without awareness turns into emotional autopilot. Autopilot follows whatever input feels strongest. The strongest input is rarely wisdom, it is usually agitation. Agitation keeps attention stuck in short cycles. Short cycles never reach long outcomes. So you live in emotional micro-states. Excited, exhausted, distracted, restless, reactive. None of these build self-respect. Self-respect needs consistency. Consistency needs attention control. If your attention is outsourced, you cannot build consistency. Without consistency, you lose trust in your own word. A person who cannot trust their own word collapses into self-doubt. Self-doubt becomes internal noise. Noise demands distraction. You return to the device because doubt feels unbearable. So the loop evolves beyond addiction. Now it becomes dependence on stimulation for psychological survival. You do not use stimulation for pleasure, you use it to manage instability. Instability turns you into emotional prey. Prey does not evaluate, prey just reacts. Reaction-driven individuals are easier to shape through emotional narrative. A narrative repeated enough becomes belief. Belief repeated enough becomes identity. Identity repeated enough becomes worldview. If your worldview is built through addiction, who benefits? The system benefits by predicting your desire before you feel it. Predictable desire is a currency in attention economics. Your cravings are measured, packaged, and monetized. Your psychology becomes a product. Products are not free. Products are owned. And yet a deeper mechanism waits untouched. If stimulation controls your emotions and timing controls your impulses, what controls your internal meaning? Do you ever question why empty stimulation feels meaningful? Why does random input feel like personal relevance? What if your sense of meaning is being conditioned? Meaning is not discovered, meaning is constructed by attention. Whatever repeatedly captures attention begins to feel important. Importance is not truth, importance is frequency. The brain associates repeated signals with survival relevance. So repetition becomes a gateway into belief formation. When stimulation repeats emotional patterns, your brain encodes them as significance. Significance becomes interpretation, interpretation becomes reality. Reality becomes identity. Identity decides what you protect and what you abandon. If addiction shapes identity, meaning can be engineered. Engineered meaning is a psychological trap. You start valuing what the device rewards. You start ignoring what the device cannot monetize. Internal growth has no notification. Discipline has no push alert. Self-mastery has no colorful badge. You chase what the system highlights. You neglect what the system hides. This is not accident. This is architecture. When architecture guides meaning, autonomy collapses. Autonomy requires choosing meaning through personal difficulty. Difficulty is slow. Difficulty is subtle. Difficulty offers little stimulation. A stimulated brain rejects difficulty because difficulty delays reward. Delayed reward is the foundation of long-term success. The device trains your brain to hate delay. When delay becomes intolerable, you avoid goals that matter. Your attention drifts toward goals that create quick emotional payoff. Quick payoff weakens delayed gratification circuitry. Weakened delay capacity destroys ambition. Without ambition, the mind replaces creation with consumption. Consumption feels safe because nothing is demanded from you. No challenge, no risk, no silence, no accountability. When accountability disappears, responsibility dissolves. A person without responsibility becomes mentally passive. Mental passivity invites external authority. Authority shapes taste, shapes desire, shapes direction. Direction then arrives from outside, not inside. External direction is not guidance, it is psychological outsourcing. Outsourcing begins subtle. You check trends instead of thinking. You check reactions instead of evaluating. You check approval instead of self-respect. Approval becomes the emotional compass. The compass points to whatever gains attention fastest. Speed becomes priority. Speed ruins depth. Depth is where independent thinking forms. Independent thinking threatens manipulation. So stimulation keeps you above the depth line. Your emotional vocabulary shrinks under this influence. You cannot name what you feel without curated labels. You outsource your interpretation to whatever narrative is trending. Trend-based interpretation leads to collective thinking. Collective thinking erases discomfort by replacing it with conformity. Conformity is psychological sedation. When you match emotional patterns with the collective, you stop questioning. Questioning is the engine of autonomy. Without autonomy, thinking becomes mimicry. Mimicry feels intelligent, but it is obedient. Obedience does not require understanding. The system never needs you to understand. It only needs you to participate. Participation feeds data. Data feeds prediction. Prediction feeds control. Control is maintained by emotional stimulation, not logic. Logic is slow. Logic is patient. Logic breaks hypnosis. Hypnosis thrives in emotional volatility. A volatile mind cannot filter manipulation from entertainment. The deeper danger is identity fragmentation. You become a collage of dopamine-driven preferences. No root, no center, no mission. Without a mission, time loses weight. You burn years without noticing the absence of progress. Progress demands delayed reward. Delayed reward feels painful to a stimulation-trained brain. So you escape from progress and call it comfort. Comfort becomes self-sabotage dressed as stress relief. The loop feels natural because your environment normalizes it. Everyone scrolls. Everyone reacts. Everyone chases stimulation. Normal does not equal healthy. Collective addiction does not equal freedom. Freedom requires ownership of meaning. Ownership requires attention discipline. Discipline requires discomfort. Discomfort requires courage. Courage demands silence. Silence reveals truth. And truth exposes the manipulation you depend on. So the question rises like a blade against illusion. If engineered meaning can shape identity, what happens when engineered identity begins to shape desire? Do you ever notice how desire changes without your permission? Why does wanting feel personal when it might be implanted? What if your deepest cravings are manufactured reactions? Desire is not born in isolation, desire feeds on exposure. The more you see something, the more acceptable it feels. The more acceptable it feels, the more desirable it becomes. Exposure regulates preference, preference trains desire, desire guides behavior. If exposure is controlled externally, preference becomes programmable. Programmable desire is not fantasy, it is measurable psychology. Your brain mirrors emotional signals from repeated influence. Influence teaches your nervous system what to chase. You chase what is rewarded, not what is meaningful. Reward is the emotional shortcut that replaces introspection. Introspection is the enemy of unexamined conditioning. Conditioning encourages pursuit without reflection. Reflection slows impulsive desire. Slowness threatens addiction. Addiction needs speed. Speed pushes you into automatic craving. Automatic craving does not question cost. It does not evaluate purpose. It does not examine consequence. It only asks, where is the next emotional surge? Once craving bypasses consequence, control disappears. Control becomes an illusion you defend with excuses. You say you are relaxing. You say you are unwinding. You say you are informed. None of these statements describe autonomy. Autonomy requires intentional desire. Intentional desire arises from conscious selection. Selection demands criteria. Criteria demand standards. Standards require identity. Identity requires internal authorship. Authorship is impossible if you outsource stimulation. Outsourced stimulation writes emotional code into your mind. The code rearranges priorities, rearranges values, rearranges attention. Attention becomes the instrument of manipulation. But the most hidden layer is not attention and not desire. The deepest layer is belief. Belief is the structure your mind uses to reason. If stimulation can influence belief, reasoning becomes emotional obedience. Look at how outrage spreads. Look at how comparison spreads. Look at how insecurity spreads. None of these serve clarity. All of them serve engagement. Engagement feeds the system that engineered the craving. Your mind becomes a battlefield between impulse and intention. Impulse is trained. Intention is abandoned. Abandoned intention creates existential discomfort. Existential discomfort fuels more distraction. And distraction begins to feel like identity protection. But identity cannot grow inside a cage. Growth needs silence. Silence needs attention control. Attention control needs refusal. Refusal breaks addiction at the molecular level. When you refuse stimulation, the brain enters withdrawal. Withdrawal feels like anxiety. But anxiety is detox, not danger. The device taught you that boredom is threat. But boredom is space. Space is bandwidth for internal voice. Internal voice is where self-authority waits. Self-authority is the final threat to manipulation. Once authority returns to the mind, desire stops obeying engineered stimuli. Belief stops bending to emotional bait. Meaning stops collapsing under novelty. Attention becomes selective. And addiction loses structure. Recovery is not dramatic. It is slow recalibration. You train tolerance for silence. You build appetite for depth. You stop rewarding automatic reaction. Each small refusal becomes a fracture in the architecture. Fractures lead to collapse. Collapse opens awareness. Awareness restores ownership. Ownership returns authorship of meaning. Authorship restores alignment. Alignment restores mission. Mission restores direction. Direction frees you from emotional outsourcing. Freedom rebuilds identity from the inside outward. And the final question stands without mercy. If you reclaim attention, if you reclaim meaning, if you reclaim desire, will you finally reclaim your mind? Or has the system already taught you to fear that freedom?